I am delighted to welcome everybody. I'm Bev Johnson, President and CEO of the Institute for Patient and Family Centered Care. We're thrilled that you have joined us today for this very important webinar and the discussion about the opioid epidemic with Dan Quinones and Liz Crocker. Next, please. Just a few helpful tips before we get started. While you're muted, we hope that you will use the chat box to post questions and comments. That's going to be an important part of the dialogue and conversation that we have today. I think you will enjoy it most during the conversation part of the webinar if you choose gallery view at the top right-hand corner of the Zoom window. And we will be recording this webinar so that you can come back and listen to it again or share it with colleagues. It will be on our website within 24 hours. And if you have any technical problems, please check in with Natasha at her phone number 646-789-1613. Next. So we are thrilled that we can hold this very special pre-conference webinar and have an opportunity to share a little bit with you about what the reformatted, exciting virtual conference is going to be like. Next, please. So while we're all disappointed that we're not going to be together in Nashville, we are promising that we're going to bring Nashville, its fun, its music, its uniqueness to all of you across North America and around the world. The virtual conference will be held starting August 18th and all the way through September 10th. So it gives you flexibility in participating and not missing any of the programming. We will have a kickoff week, the regular dates of the conference, August 18th to 20th. Over that 5-week period, we'll have 46 breakout sessions, opportunities for you to engage and have conversations with experts. There are over 60 posters, and they're going to be extremely dynamic. For those of you who like visiting poster sessions online, there's just a new dimension to them that I think you will enjoy. Next slide, please. Our conversation about the opioid epidemic, while we're starting it today, we are going to be continuing it during the virtual conference. And one of the key innovations evolving from this work are meaningful partnerships with people with lived experience. So there will be a very dynamic panel where they share their lived experience and the work they're doing to develop supportive systems of care, but they also will be giving you guidance about how you can recruit and support people with lived experience as your partners. We have 2 extraordinary plenary sessions that are going to deal with the issues of safety, quality, and equity. Having a CEO of a health system with a family leader, part of that plenary session. And then from public health, we will be having an incredible leader talking about trauma, fostering equity, and seeing strengths and building on community resilience. Next slide, please. The virtual conference, although we're disappointed not in being together, the virtual conference is offering us incredible new opportunities to take the programming and have to extend it to people across your organizations. And so that you can use this as content for leadership development, continuing education for staff and clinicians and patient and family advisors. It also can be used to set the stage for quality improvement and safety. So stay tuned for learning more about the international conference. And next slide, please. We promise also to have fun, and these are some of the neat features that we will be sharing and having prizes and surprises for you, so you won't miss not actually being in Nashville. Next slide, please. And we are so grateful to all of our sponsors, but especially to our leadership sponsor, Vanderbilt University Medical Center. You will learn more about them as the weeks pass by here. Next slide, please. But today we're just especially grateful to the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy to support the opioid epidemic programming today and at the international conference. We're very fortunate to have Lucinda Main, a friend and a colleague who I made 8 years ago, who's taught me so much about the important role of pharmacists and the importance of interprofessional education. We serve together on a National Academy of Medicine action collaborative on the opioid epidemic. And it is just an honor to present Lucinda Main to you. Lucinda?
Thank you so much, Bev. It's just a privilege to be a part of today's program and to be able to support the Institute in incorporating this really important content into your offerings over the course of the next several months. AACP is a strong supporter of patient-centered care, having learned so much from Bev over these last several years, but we're also very, very interested in making contributions to preventing the opioid and epidemic from continuing to spread. And our members are so actively involved. I wanted to just point out the URL at the bottom of this slide. It contains, or it takes you to a repository of education, research, outreach activities that our 143 member schools, the schools and colleges of pharmacy, have currently ongoing as it relates to making contributions to patients' pain management and substance use, disorder prevention and treatment. But without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce our conversation speakers for today's program. Liz Crocker is coming to us from Nova Scotia. She serves on the Institute's board. She's also the founder and owner of Canada's oldest children's bookstore and has many, many other accomplishments in her career. Sam Jonas is based in LA. He's a freelance journalist and an award-winning author. And today their conversation is going to focus on Dreamland, a book that many of you have already put into the chat that you're very familiar with. And I personally am looking forward to hearing what we've learned since 2015 when that book contributed to our understanding of the opioid crisis. Thanks so much.
So I think it is over to Sam and me. Hi, Sam. How are you?
How you doing? Good, Liz. How about you?
Great. So I'm just going to say a couple of words to the assembled group. Thank you all for coming to this webinar. I met Sam initially through his book, and then he and I had a chance to chat last week for, well, it was over an hour, and not a minute of it was anything other than purely fascinating. So our objective today is to just have a conversation. So imagine we're in your living room and he and I are just going to chat, and we have some ideas of things that we want to cover. We have paid attention to questions that some of you sent in advance, and we'll try to incorporate some of those within our chat. I think I speak for both of us that we could probably talk in conversation with each other for a couple of hours, but the webinar is limited to an hour. We're going to try to chat for about 40 minutes and then have some time for questions and answers. And we have been given permission that we can just stretch the webinar for another 10 minutes for those of you who are able to stay or want to stay. So here we are. Let's just jump right in. And Sam, I love everything about your book. And one of the things that I love is you started with a timeline showing that in 1804 was the first time morphine was made from opium, and then you go right up to 2014 and the death of Philip Seymour Hoffman. So I appreciated that factual history, but in the book, you set such a rich historical context for the opiate crisis, and it makes me wonder why you wanted to delve into such a complicated topic. I think of the line, "What a tangled web we weave." So,
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, thank you, Liz. It's great to be talking with you. Thank you to Bev and the others for organizing this. It's really great. And for all those who have read my book, I really appreciate y'all reading Dreamland. I'm now working on a follow-up to Dreamland that I'm hoping to have done in 2 months. That's the prayer. We'll see. I did not want to write about this. I wanted only to write. I had lived in Mexico for 10 years. And I only wanted to write about stuff related to Mexico. I came out of Mexico, went back to LA, got a job at the LA Times, and really I just wanted to write about immigration, street gangs, border stuff, that kind of thing. And along the way, I discovered that there was a new resurgence in the heroin market. And I could not understand how Mexican heroin traffickers would be doing better, but who would be buying heroin? I mean, didn't we go through that in the 1970s? Like, I had no idea when I started this. I can assure you, I had no idea what an OxyContin was. I had never heard of it. And Vicodin, pain management, I would have been really, really happy never in my life to have written one single word about healthcare at all. I was really about being a crime reporter. That's what I wanted to do. And along the way, I realized I discovered the guys in the book that I write about, the Jalisco boys, and their expanding market. But along the way, I began to realize the reason that they have this expanding market is because we as a country, as a culture, really, if you ask me, went through what I call the American Revolution of pain management in American medicine, and focusing extraordinarily on the new use of opioid, narcotic painkillers, prescription painkillers for all manner of pain and that they'd never been used for before, and also with just extraordinary amounts of refills. And when I began to understand that, I realized that the story about the heroin traffickers was actually the small story. And the much, much bigger story was the one that I'd stumbled on about, that I knew nothing about, because all of it took place when I was in Mexico and I was focused elsewhere. I really didn't care about that. So I began to realize that this was in fact a book, and it was much bigger than I had thought. And I thought too that the book would be really focused. At first I thought it would be only about the Mexican guys, and then I realized, no, this is a much bigger, expansive story, and one that deals also, I think, it came to understand as time went on, as I did reporting and interviewing for a long time, traveling the country, that it was also more than just about drug trafficking and drug marketing. It was also about some fundamental stuff about our country and our culture, isolation, destruction of community. I came to believe was extraordinarily important and why we have this. And so all of that is kind of what brought me to where we are today. The book came out in 2015. I have been stunned. I can tell you, I have been just stunned to see that it had any effect at all. Because when I was writing the book, I was convinced that nobody would read it. I found this deafening silence all across the country. I really felt very much alone as writing this book. And when the book came out, then I began to see this expanding kind of awareness and people coming out of the shadows, families especially more important, families of addicts, their loved ones dying or in addiction, no longer ashamed, and coming out of the shadows, being willing to talk about this. So all of this has been stunning to me and my family, because we really assumed that when the book came out, it would just fade immediately. And here we are 5 years later.
But certainly as an author, the last thing you want is your book to fade. I mean,
of course,
you must have had some, well, I'm imagining you would have had some aspirations for it. And
yeah.
So.
Well, the idea was behind the book. I remember when I first started it, I got a bunch of the books about heroin from the library. I bought a few online, and I put them all on my kitchen table,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at them, and I realized, what do they all have in common? One thing was that nobody read them. These were books from academic books. They were books from rock stars addicted to heroin. Didn't matter what the book was. Nobody read the book. Nobody cared. And I thought to myself, how am I going to write a book about a topic that really is daunting, really is a downer topic, and nobody apparently wants to read about? And yet it's this huge, huge national story. And I saw it developing. This was 2012, basically, so 8 years ago now. I saw this developing as this huge national story, and it's my journalistic role, a duty or job, basically, to show that this is a major story. How am I going to do this when nobody really wants to read about heroin on that, as evidenced by the books in front of me? And so the way my hunch was, I have to make it like a blockbuster movie or TV show. And that's why if you go through the book, all the chapters are very short, because I wanted to have like many stories going at once, you know? And that was my aspiration for it, that this was a book that you could bring people in, that this was my attempt. I did not know it would work. I later realized this via emails and Facebook posts and all the rest, that it actually had worked that way. But at the time I didn't know any other way, because I knew that if I wrote a book with 25 and 30-page chapters, it would suffer the same fate as the other books in front of me. So that was the aspiration, but I was routinely throughout the research shown that nothing was going to happen, because so many people did not want to talk about it. Nobody at the media really paid consistent attention to it, and politicians therefore found other things to be interested in.
Well, and, you know, to that point, you're obviously a born storyteller. That it goes without saying, and I think you.
Thank you.
You say somewhere in the book that the history of heroin is best told by addicts, and you really honor that. You really you let them tell their own story. But I was intrigued at the very beginning, the first chapter, which explains the title of the book. You went to small town America. You went to a place called Portsmouth, and you didn't initially talk about drugs. You talked about the vibrancy of the community and then what happened. And can you just sort of elaborate on Dreamland?
Yes, and I chose that because, first of all, I discovered that during my research. I did not plan to call my book Dreamland. I did not know Dreamland Pool existed when I started in 2012.
You didn't call it Black Tar?
No, I was going to call it Doped Up or something like that. Some very, kind of not terribly inviting title. Along the way, though, I began to realize that these are deeper themes we're talking about. You peel away the onion of this topic, and you come to understand, it's about drug trafficking, drug marketing, certainly by the companies, but also about deeper issues of what we've done to community, what we've ignored, what we've destroyed that brings us together. And along the way, I discovered this pool, Dreamland Pool in Portsmouth, and its demise, and what it meant to people, and how it glued people together. It was like almost like the town plaza where everyone saw each other. Everybody grew up under the watchful eyes of all these parents, and then I put up there's a page called if you're from Portsmouth, ... or something like that. I was a member of that, and so I put up there one day. I'm just hearing about the swimming pool you guys had in town. Anybody care to give me any recollections of what you thought, all that kind of 3 days of long posts from people from all over the country, used to live in Portsmouth, about all that the pool meant to them when they were growing up. Oh, I kissed my first girl. Oh, I remember the suntan lotion. I remember the radio station with the blur, with the half-hour blurb saying time to turn so you won't burn, because they knew all their listeners were at the swimming pool. The kind of the classlessness of the pool. So everybody looks the same in swim trunks, right? Nobody looks different. I was stunned. It was really beautiful to read. Some of them brought me to tears, and a lot of that is what inspired, I think, that first chapter of the book, just what people had lost. And by losing Dreamland in Portsmouth, there was kind of a way of saying, this is the kind of thing that we have lost as a country. You can multiply in different ways Dreamland by millions all across America, and you will see what we have lost as a country, which left us then isolated and then therefore vulnerable to a scourge like the opioid prescription pill flood that came beginning in the mid-1990s.
It's interesting because a moment ago you talked about the sort of, in a way, before the opiate epidemic was the pain epidemic, and in North America we sort of feel like we have a right to be free of pain, and lots of people were quite willing to help that along. But I also remarked in your book, and I found it fascinating, that you observe that in the developing world, which maybe has less health care and maybe more pain,
Yeah.
but opioid have not, the use has not grown like it has in North America.
No,
Did
it's
that,
only in the,
did that
yeah.
shock you, or did it actually sort of feed your analysis about
No, I
where
thought
we're
it
going?
was part of the analysis. I thought that
Yeah.
that here we were in a country where we thought we prosperous country in the history of the world, that, you know, this country where we really were beyond want and into need. Beyond need and into want. In so many places, the wealthiest, you know, middle class culture ever in the history of the planet, and here we are. Why, you know, I remember I was with a cop in suburban Charlotte, South Carolina area of Charlotte suburbs, and he was going, you know, like, I arrest these people, these kids and these people in these neighborhoods a lot for pain pills, and he's driving around in the perfect neighborhood, you know, pristine lawns. He goes, what pain, man? Look around. They all make more than I do. You know, what pain are they? That was a striking conversation I had with that cop, and I was like, yeah, good question, man. You know, and I think that's what got me. I think that was one of the first conversations that got me thinking about what else is part of this, and it was this idea that we felt that we were entitled to a life free of pain, and most importantly, too, and part of that is that doctors may tell us, no, you don't need this. You need to walk more, swim more, eat better, stop smoking, stop drinking, doing all these health, wellness under the heading of our own wellness, accountability for our own wellness. And we as a culture kind of said, no, doc, you fix me. And the doc doesn't have the ability to fix us. We have the ability, law to have the accountability for our own wellness. And that's what we turned away from. And the only thing the doctor has that will work quickly, and because that's how we wanted it, were pills. So he didn't have miracles. These doctors don't have miracles. They just have reality. And one of the things, we're demanding, essentially, in their view, pills. And they began to feel this. Doctors began to feel this very strongly. Hey, you know what? Give me something. I want it now, you know, kind of thing. And I think doctors felt that and began to go along with that. And I think really, when you talk about one of the key roots of this problem, it comes back to us, all American health consumers, and our unreasonable demands on doctors, on medicine, and our unwillingness, I think, as a culture. Obviously, individuals are different, but as a culture, our unwillingness to do the work, you know, do the work that nature requires of us. Move, get up. Get exercise, stop smoking. For goodness sake, cut way back on the kinds of foods that fast food culture promotes to us, et cetera, all these kinds of things.
So we're going to come back to that, but I just want to sort of go back to some of the players in this tangled web.
Yeah.
And I think you and I talked about this. I was struck that there was a doctor who graduated from medical school in my home city in Halifax, David Proctor, who ended up setting up a clinic and had people literally lined around the block.
Yeah.
And it was just, I think you call it a pill factory.
A pill mill. Yeah.
Pill mill.
Well,
yeah.
Portsmouth was in this. So I went to Portsmouth for initially because it was the center of the pill mill. That's where the pill mill was invented. The guy who invented it was David Proctor, right, from Nova Scotia or from Canada. And the
Sorry,
idea.
everybody.
He came down to work in Portsmouth 20 years prior, but then as the town kind of decayed and fell apart, job loss, all that stuff, then Dreamland Pool was destroyed because they couldn't support it. They dug it up and they turned it into a strip mall with a large parking lot. It's like a Joni Mitchell song, kind of, you know. He I think gradually declined into corruption. That's my assessment. That initially he wanted to find solutions for people's pain. And then after a while, withered by the relentlessness of the people who came to see him, and the withering kind of idea that they needed their pain pills and stuff, that he basically went into that business and began, you know, essentially long lines out the door. And then he began hiring doctors to run it for him. A lot of these were docs on the locum tenens list who already had substance abuse problems themselves from all over the country. Some of those stuck around and started their own clinics. So he was kind of like known as kind of like the Ray Kroc of the pill mill. But in these areas, the pills became so prevalent so that excuse me, that for a long time heroin didn't even penetrate those areas because the supply of pills was so big and so unceasing. But also it was there was this feeling like that this kind of would never end, and also that there was this huge business model in an area that had been suffering economic decline for many years. And now for a while they're the only new businesses that were locally owned to start in these areas were pill mills run by local docs.
Yeah, and I think, not to fully cast aspersions on gambling casinos, but I know many communities have decided to build a gambling casino because it's an opportunity. So that it's such a dilemma to mix the entrepreneurial spirit and opportunity, but with pernicious consequences. So
yeah,
I mean, we could stay wallowing in the historical understanding and description of misery forever, but I think you also saw some places and some routes to better living, whether it be, what was it, the Recovery Association Project, RAP,
right.
Narcotics Anonymous, community recovery.
Yeah, and what I would say though that what I've seen growing out of all this, I've seen a lot. I would say that there were some things that I saw beginning when I was writing the book, but I would say that it's really been since the book's come out that I found places and counties where, particularly counties where I'll talk about in a minute why that is, where they're trying new things. And I think what happened was this. For a long time, this was silent. This was what abetted the spread of this epidemic greatly, and that was the fact that nobody wanted to talk about it. No families wanted to come forward. Nobody wanted to pay attention, confront this issue. Very much like the early days of the AIDS epidemic, if you ask me. And so what happened was it spread, and then after a certain point, I think the book, frankly, had a lot to do with this. People began to be aware, and they reached a critical mass of people all across the country. And so what I began to see after the book came out, one of the surprising things, stunning things in our family, I have to say, was that I began to get all these invitations to go speak. And so I ended up, since the book came out, I think I've spoken, I want to say like in 225, 230 different places, and small towns and conferences, et cetera, like this, since in the last 5 years. And one of the things I began to notice was I was doing this was that in county after county after county, it was remarkable. By 16 or 17, I was clearly onto it. I was asking every time I go to a different county. You would find these groups forming. And it was a classic, on one level, you would look at it as kind of a classic task force or something like that, except for it wasn't. What was fascinating about it was it involved parole and judges and cops and sheriffs and jailers, yes. But it went far beyond that. It was like an awakening of the whole community, all these different voices that perhaps had never really been fully utilized when dealing with a drug problem. Now you had Kiwanis Club, you had churches and different clergy, you had PTA, different principals, a superintendent, maybe college president locally, you had doctors, you had hospital administrators, recovering addicts, you had the Chamber of Commerce was big. I thought it was very important to get involved in this because this is really a business story. A lot of places you just can't find people to fill jobs because nobody's passing a drug screen. What I loved about it was, first of all, it was taking from the entire community. And even though these were small counties and you expect people to know each other, actually they did not. And that was the level of isolation, that we had achieved, I guess, in this country, that so many people just didn't know each other, even though they lived in a small county. And the other thing that was great about these groups was that they were not asking permission You know, they were not waiting for the pilot project to be done. So they know the 10 bullet points of what they need to institute in their county to be able to deal with the opioid epidemic. They were just forming up. And that's what was beautiful about it. They didn't wait. They just started forming and stumbling. It was messy. It was far from perfect, but they came with the attitude, and I think they realized this as they worked, that there was no one solution. And this is very, very important. We got into this because we wanted one solution to our pain, and that was pills. Now, we have to really get away from that idea. There is no one solution. Instead, it involves a community of solutions, all these different things, all working together. And they intuitively, I think, as they worked on this, began to understand that as well. These were revolution, in my opinion, in the culture of America, with its focus on kind of isolation and everyone for themselves. These were radical, revolutionary steps, even though, you know, it might have been something that they might well have tried 30, 40 years ago. We'd gotten away from that. We'd gotten out of that habit, you know. And so the people would always ask me, where do you see, and these counties, I would be speaking to them, where do you see things going really well? And I would say, right here. Look, I'm a reporter. I don't have the answers to all this. My faith, and maybe it is just a faith, is in our own ability as Americans to come together and together to find the solutions appropriate to our county. I found them frequently in the county level for a couple of reasons. First of all, the county is small enough yet large enough to kind of combine everybody, but not be too large. And also, if you think about it, it's the county that is a level of government most mightily affected by the opioid epidemic. The county usually funds medical examiners, libraries, county hospital, sheriffs, judge, courts, jail, all these kinds of things were horribly, horribly affected. And so the county level is where you're finding these things taking place. And as time went on, as I said, by 2017, I was finding these in every single county that I would go to, every place then. And to me, that was one of the beauties to grow out of all this, that once the opioid epidemic was so severe, so lacerating, that it actually, and so terrifying for a lot of people, heroin in particular, you know, and then of course fentanyl, that actually forced us to come together in ways that we had ignored or had not tried for quite a long time.
So it's so interesting that you talk about that, because of course people who are familiar with the Institute know that some of our foundational principles are partnership and collaboration and sharing information honestly and offering dignity and respect to everybody irrespective of their circumstances. So to me, you're describing the things that we hold near and dear. I guess I'm curious to know, in these bubbling up kind of from the ground level community thrusts, to what degree were families of addicts and recovering addicts themselves starting to be driving forces, or were they still sort of suffering from a bit of shame and were late to the party?
I would say that there was still a lot who were, but there were many who were stepping out. I would say fewer stepping out. But the key thing is this, and maybe I'm a reporter, so I have this deep faith in storytelling. But I think once you begin to tell stories and hear stories, and you get to know people for whose stories these are, then that is how change comes. That there isn't really, I don't believe in any other kind of change, deep societal change, that doesn't come without stories being part of the mix. So we all kind of feel it. We feel it in ways that weren't happening because everyone was afraid, ashamed, mortified, hiding it. The obituaries, you know, for many years were all fabrications, you know, and that's what began to change too. You began to hear, no, he died after a struggle with addiction, and then usually the father or mother would add something saying, you know, parents beware, or there would be some part that would say this is going to affect everybody, and sure enough, it has affected a lot of different people. So I'm thinking that there was some of that, not enough, but it was enough but I mean, not a lot, but there was enough to get people understanding the stories of people around them and motivating them.
You know, one of my favorite writers is Rachel Naomi Remen, and she says, facts bring us to knowledge, but stories bring us to wisdom. And I'm intrigued to see that the language isn't right, but I want to say you walk your talk, because on your own website, you have a section called Tell Your True Tale. And you're providing a forum for people to tell their stories.
And that grows out of a writing workshop that I was doing in East LA at the East LA Public Library for 3-4 years. But it's a reflection of my own belief that, first of all, everybody's got a great story to tell. Everybody can learn to write better. And that once we begin to hear stories, I agree with the author you quoted, that there is something true, essentially true to its core from stories that you pick up that you may not always get from just the sociology of them. You know?
And I think, when I say stories bring us to wisdom, it's, it sort of sounds grand and philosophical. I think from my own work in terms of the power of storytelling, sometimes the wisdom has to start internally. And I know there's so much research coming out now about people writing about their own trauma. And it's showing that not only is it psychologically healing, which you might expect, but it also improves somebody's immunological status. It changes in a good way blood pressure and so on and so forth. So the power of storytelling can't be emphasized enough in my sense of things. But you know what, I want to switch for a minute. As I said, you and I could talk forever about everything, but I resonate with what you're saying about if there's going to be freedom from pain, it's rarely from a single thing. And a number of things that you mentioned, like getting out and walking and having a life of purpose and being with other people and good eating and so on and so forth. And here we are. We are in our homes right now, and we are alone, and we are hiding out of respect for the health of other people and ourselves in a world of COVID. So what's happening now? What are you hearing?
Right.
You're in touch.
Let me just back up just a bit and say that the stuff that I was talking to you about, the counties and so on, is one of the positive developments that come out of all this. There are, however, very scary negative stuff and they have to do with the underworld, primarily out of Mexico, and their transition from plant-based drugs to synthetic drugs, primarily.
So it used to be just guys who wanted to get Levi jeans, and now it's a bit more.
Yeah. I mean, the early drug traffickers out of Mexico were all rancheros. They were all farmers or ranchers or what have you, and they were used to growing stuff, marijuana, opium poppies, and now that's really kind of fading. And the drugs that make most business sense, the no-brainers, if you like, are fentanyl and methamphetamine, neither of which involve a plant. And what's more, you can make them any time of the year. And so the supply has just been catastrophic for this country. And so we were in the middle of all that, of massive amounts of fentanyl killing ungodly amounts of people, right? And then the figures are, I think for last year we now know what the figures are, and it was something like 36,000 people died from fentanyl-related overdoses, a part of a 71,000 overdose deaths nationwide. And so it was a hard enough fight with that. And it was kind of like these insurgent county groups against this massive flow of very addictive, very cheap, very prevalent, and highly potent dope from the underworld. Pills are still a problem. Overdose to pills have not declined. They have risen, even though the prescriptions have declined. But nevertheless, you're getting these things coming in, and so along with all this comes then the coronavirus. Now, initially, my own thinking kind of has evolved a little bit, or expanded. Let me put it that way. And I would say initially, I began to think the first month or so of coronavirus, I began to think that maybe this will teach us the importance of community now that we are deprived of it. right? Now that we're all alone in our houses, we will understand how important it is just simply being outside with people. How do you create community? I don't know all the ways, but I do know that it probably starts with being outside with other Americans. You know, and we are not. I mean, COVID and coronavirus are just a far example of what we already were doing as a culture, which was basically staying inside our houses on our screens. You know, so now we've had to face it. We don't have the option of going outside. We don't have the option of communing with other people. And I thought this would be a teaching moment, you know. And I still think that there is that. I haven't exactly changed that attitude. But the other thing that's more ominous, though, is what I see happening with coronavirus. Let me back up one quick second. The coronavirus initially, I thought was also teaching us the importance of how of making that we are only as strong as the most vulnerable among us. We are only as strong as the cashier who doesn't have health insurance, who has to come to work even though she's sick. We are only as strong as that meat packer in Kansas, right? And the idea that we're only as strong as the most vulnerable, I thought was a very healthy one for us to learn as a culture.
Right.
However, what's been going on lately, and I think because it seems like because of our, I would say, slipshod or haphazard response across the country to this problem, what I think is now poised to happen is that coronavirus will begin to return us, in many areas of this country at least, to conditions that were present when we were first getting into the opioid. They're part of why the opioid epidemic started in like Portsmouth or Rust Belt areas or Appalachia or, you know, Maine and rural Vermont and places like that. And that is to say that it will be recreating conditions of isolation, conditions of unemployment, economic distress, maybe some services overwhelmed, maybe focus elsewhere. So our focus is not going to be on the opioid epidemic, but rather on, of course, this virus, which is how it should be. But it's losing the focus of this very pernicious problem that we must deal with as a country. And of course, for recovering addicts, it's returning them to the state of being essentially in addiction. Everyone alone, nobody kind of, addiction. And when you get into recovery, one of the first things you are told is do not isolate. Be around other people. Reach out. Be around mentors, et cetera. All these kinds of things. Very, very important. 12-step groups, all that kind of stuff. And now we have to do that by Zoom. We have to do this by Zoom. Everybody's got to be alone. And to me, that is one of the truly grave dangers, because I think what we are going to see is coronavirus and the opioid epidemic kind of combining, dovetailing in very, very dangerous ways. And you're seeing that now. We saw that in 2019, without the coronavirus, we saw overdose deaths uptick once again. And I am cringing. I do not want to see what the numbers are for this year. I believe it'll be well above even the very high levels.
Yeah, and I can tell you, in my country, Canada, the two western provinces, Alberta and British Columbia, they are now, so it's kind of the good news, bad news, right? The good news is we're doing relatively quite well with respect to COVID-19, but the deaths from opiate overdoses are higher than deaths from COVID. So, like I said, it's kind of weird, good news, bad news situation. Because this point that you're making is so important, I just want to read a paragraph from your afterword, and then I'm going to ask you what you're going to write, what you're working on now, and then we'll move to questions. I have many more questions on my scribbled sheets, but people are chatting in questions, and I know they're anxious to get a hold of you. So, but in your afterword, and you say, heroin is, I believe, the final expression of values we have fostered for 35 years. It turns every addict into narcissistic, self-absorbed, solitary, hyper consumers. A life that finds opiates turns away from family and community and devotes itself entirely to self-gratification by buying and consuming one product, the drug that makes being alone not just all right, but preferable. So for right now, and I'm sure you've been asked this, for families who have a family member, somebody they love, who is suffering from opiate addiction, do you have any words of comfort, advice, hope?
I would say that they need to not hide. Number one is not, you cannot hide it.
Right.
It does you no good. It is actually damaging to you and to your family member, and to the community as a whole, for you to say, I'm going to hide this. You need to reach out. You need to be part of a larger community. You need to talk to people who've gone through this before. You need to talk with people who recognize the signs and recognize the pitfalls, the problems you may encounter. You need to be part of the community, and as best you can, you need to get together physically with people. Now, this is hard, but it's not impossible, I don't believe. And I do believe that it's an important step. Wearing a mask, absolutely. Being 6 to 8 feet away from people, yes, but that you still need to be part of a community. There is no solution, I don't believe, that does not come through working like from this to this. This is where, you know, in isolation, all problems are insoluble, including the addiction of your loved one.
Right.
And together is how you deal with this. And it's hard because people are ashamed and so on. I understand that. You have to move beyond that. There is no other way.
You know, and one of the rules from Red Cross first aid training is when you want to help somebody else, you cannot put yourself in harm's way, literally or figuratively. So, you know, I resonate with your suggestion that people need to get their own help and their own support. And I know that certainly in the AA world, Al-Anon is very helpful for families. And I imagine there's a comparable version in the NA world. So whatever you can do to nourish yourself so that then you
Very
have
important.
some reservoir to be of assistance and to figure out how to love somebody unconditionally and not judge them and get that shame out of the closet. Just a couple of minutes on what are you working on now?
I'm really writing a follow-up book, and I can tell you I'm surprised as all that there would be one. Because I thought that this book would fail and there would be no reason to follow it up with anything. But this epidemic continues to morph and change and evolve, like almost like a metastasizing cancer almost. And so I was talking with my editors at the publishing house, and so we just kind of decided a couple years ago that this would be a good idea. This takes even a greater step back, and it talks about again several storylines through this book. I think that's a very effective way of writing about this topic. One of them is though the neuroscience of addiction, which I have come to understand, and I'm so fascinated. You know, what our brains are like on prayer, what our brains are like on storytelling, what our brains are like on righteous virtue on Twitter, where you're telling somebody else how failed that person they are because they said this, that, or the other thing, you know. But what it's also dealing with is the idea that we come from a culture. We are now in a culture where we are being primed for addiction by simply the many things that come out that are being marketed to us that are legal already. Social media apps are a big one. You know, they're wonderful things, but they're also highly addictive. Depends on what you how you use them and which ones you're talking about. But sugar is all hits the same opioid receptors as does heroin. Fast food in general, chicken nuggets, it's the 60% fat and salt together. You know, gambling, nicotine, alcohol, social video games, pornography. I'm sure there's some others I'm missing, but these are all legal, and American capitalism has worked diligently to make these already addictive things even more addictive. Makes me wonder really if we are ever, as a culture, America is ever really going to be able to safely legalize drugs, because the drugs that are extraordinarily difficult to kick are all legal. You know, and so, and I don't know, I trust American capitalism to go responsibly with this stuff. But so that's part of it. Another part is the is the story of how Mexican traffickers came to understand fentanyl, and then they came to understand fentanyl because they were already of a mindset that we need to get away from plant-based drugs, and the drug that taught them that was methamphetamine. But then along the way, a little bit after they figured out fentanyl, they were deprived of the one chemical that made their methamphetamine, was ephedrine from Sudafed pills, all that stuff. But then they discovered an older method of making methamphetamine that just relied on chemicals in the world market. And this has allowed them to produce, as I say, monumental, catastrophic quantities of methamphetamine, prices lower than ever. And so it's the story of how the traffickers kind of came to this idea of what was smart business, and it's going to synthetic drugs, particularly these two. And then there's another thread of stories about local small stories, quiet stories, non-sexy, splashy stories about people understanding that they are only as strong as the most vulnerable, reaching out to people who are vulnerable in their midst. Kind of a community-based story thread along with the underworld thread. So, and then there's several chapters about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma as well, and how they behaved, judging from records subpoenaed by numerous attorney general, which I did not sadly have access to when I was writing Dreamland. Now with the subpoena of attorneys general offices across the country, miraculously, all this stuff is coming out, and so it's magnificent information, I have to say. So that's really the next book. I'm hoping to finish it by the end of September, and then who knows, it'll probably, I suppose, maybe be out by May or something like that.
So, you know, I can't count how many people are sort of chatting and saying, what's the title? What's the title? And I know that you weren't going to call Dreamland Dreamland, but
no,
you know what you're going to call this.
Well, here's the thing, guys. I really haven't talked about the title that I have in mind with my editor. And so if I tell you before I tell the publishing house, I'm afraid they're going to be royally upset. So
well, and my experience as a writer is you might be wedded to a title and they may say,
And they may say, right, yeah. I mean, all this depends on them too, yeah. So I think it's a pretty good title, I have to say. And I think it reflects the book in 2 words. But, you know, the problem is, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. And so I'm afraid, I will let it, believe me, I will let people know.
Well, and
before
I
the
think
book is coming out, you know what I mean?
People can follow you on your website, and I'm sure you're going to let people
know. And
know.
I'm on Facebook, Sam Quinones Journalist or something like that, and Twitter. Feel free to follow me there, please. Great, yeah.
So, as I've said several times, you and I could talk forever, but it is time to try to open it up to questions.
Happy to.
And we've got. How are we going to do this, Marie? Are you going to send questions to me and I'm going to read them to Sam, or are people going to live chat in? Yeah.
Yep. This is Beth. One of the questions you and Sam might talk about together came in from Teresa about medication-assisted therapy.
Yeah.
Whether thinking about that and thinking about the treatment in isolation or with lots of the other things you're talking about. Could you address that issue, Sam?
Sure. Medically assisted treatment, I believe, is absolutely essential. And there are many reasons why it's essential. But perhaps the main one is what I was saying earlier, and that is that we have on our streets today the most potent, cheap, prevalent, and unforgiving drug stream that we have ever seen as a country. To say you're going to spend 6 months in jail or 6 months in treatment and get out without any protective shield is inviting a death sentence, I'm afraid. And so, however, let me say this also about MAT, particularly about Suboxone. Suboxone is a magnificent tool. All of these are wonderful tools. It's medically assisted treatment. It's not medical treatment. It's medically assisted treatment. It implies that there will be other treatment combined with that. Again, a community approach to this one recovering addict's treatment. And that involves getting a driver's license back, AA meetings, whatever, a variety of things, reuniting with children, a variety of things like that that fall under the heading of life repair. The problem that we face now, and I think the methamphetamine problem is showing this to be a real serious, is that we have treated Suboxone the same way we treat pain pills. You have pain, here's a pill for it. You're recovering from it, you're in addiction, here's a pill that will numb your cravings. It will not get you the life repair that you desperately need. And the problem with that is, if you don't have that you are going to have very serious problems with people remaining in the drug world, right? They don't leave the drug world. And that is really a problem. And what that does, what has done, is create customers for whatever the drug traffickers come up with next, which turns out to be methamphetamine, right?
I remember
so
in your, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry?
I was just going to say, in your book, you talked about early methadone clinics, and dealers were just right outside saying,
yeah, exactly.
Okay, you got that, but I got something like a little better.
There needs to be a combined effort here using MAT, but not focused entirely on MAT.
So the concept of life repair is so rich and full of promise, but it's not simple, and it takes time. And you know, one of the things, you and I talked about this the other day, in this world of COVID, in our country, obviously doctor's appointments were held over the phone, and while the government said they could never fund that, they figured out how to fund it. So I wonder if in this new model, kind of one of the gifts from COVID is that we have a new model where physicians will have more time to counsel in life repair, and in that spirit of partnership and collaboration, if there will be larger teams of people who will be, you know, your human collection of tools in your toolbox, so that you can rebuild your life with other people.
You know, I missed part of your question because I'm running out of gas on my phone here, but I'm sorry, could you just repeat real briefly?
Okay, and I sort of rambled on because I knew you were having trouble, but it's sort of like just the concept of life repair is full of opportunity and promise, but it's not simple. And
and
if you wanted to do life repair for yourself, or your son or daughter who was an addict, who would you put on the team to help them repair their life?
I think what we come to understand about this is that it actually revolves around very small things frequently. It involves around, like I say, driver's licenses, a resume writing, understanding, teaching people about showing up for work on time, punctuality. When you can get to that point, and then also there's a very important issue of dealing with insurance, health insurance primarily, that actually absolutely believe has to be part of this, and that has, you know, to do with your own health, getting maybe the MAT that you might need, but then also like dental work. People have been finding that addicts frequently, when they come out of addiction, what they first want is do dental work, because their teeth are a symbol of their addiction. They're just gnarled and rotted and horrible. It does take, this is where you talk about a community and approach, and that is so important to dealing with all these different varied issues. It does, and as I've been writing about this for my next book, one of the conclusions that I've been forced to come to is that it does show how difficult, how complicated getting one person to succeed in addiction is. And of course, the fact is too that when you relapse is not like relapsing on alcohol nowadays. Relapse is an extraordinarily deadly event. And so it's always with that in the background, you know, like, and so therefore you're finding drug courts. I believe drug courts to be the future of criminal justice in this country, to handle that chunk of the the criminal justice system that is really kind of revolving around small-time dope arrests, small-time paraphernalia or whatever, drug-related arrest, into jail, never really going to prison, or maybe after a number of these arrests, there's a threat of prison. But it's normally jail to the street. And drug court is a wonderful, when they're done well, I've seen them done well, kind of intermediary to say, okay, we're going to help you with this. We're going to get to know you deeply. You're not going to just be a number, but you are also going to have to do this, really step up, be accountable, make the right choices, and we will be there weekly for you, and this kind of thing. And I think that is really the future of the criminal justice system. I think that's where I would start as well. I would work very hard to make sure my loved one got into drug court. That's one example.
Yeah, and I would imagine that part of drug court is less about shame and blame and more about what do we need, how can we help you.
Yeah, but it's also not
we,
about saying whatever you want to do is fine. No, it's about saying, no, you have to step up. You have to meet these standards. I think that's very healthy. I think that's what many addicts want, in fact. They want to be held accountable. They see the benefit of that. But it is also like not, yes, heavy judgment coming down on people. What are you doing? Blah, blah, that kind of thing. You know, it's also saying we will have to put you back in jail if you don't, meet this, And yeah, one person just said life skills. Drug courts are where I think life skills can be taught, have been taught, the ones I've seen. Life skills are, and that what is showing up for work punctually, if not a life skill, that kind of stuff is very important.
Do drug courts typically have a bevy of peer mentors who are at the ready to partner?
And they also have a different approach to, you have prosecutors, you have probation, you have social workers, all working together to design something that might be the best for this particular person. What's interesting, I find, the drug courts I go to, it seems like those people, the judge included, by the way, know everything there is to know about the person standing in front of them, who their baby mama is, where they have the spider web tattoo, they're now living with their grandma, they went to this high school, their cousins in the program as well. They know all this stuff that judges and prosecutors normally do not know. And I think that's also important. It makes people feel part of something. Like they have to work hard because it means something to the people who have shown that they care. That's part of it as well. Anyway, I've become a big believer in an important component of this whole approach being drug court. I think it's very, very important as a part of the criminal justice system.
I spent a day with friends in Atlanta who at that time were offering a ministry to homeless people. And it was such a powerful day talking with many of they called them friends, and to realize that, so often I think people in our society look at a drug addict or a homeless person as that label, but they're somebody's child. They went to school. They have a name. Their feet hurt, and in an African culture I'm aware of, the form of greeting is, I see you. And it sounds like what you're saying in the drug court is the judge is saying, I see you. And
I haven't been to dozens of drug courts, but the ones I have been to seem to work fairly well, and they're done this way. So there's this this recognition of that person and understand, and also knowledge of that person. So how'd the job go to this week? You're still working there. Oh yeah, I got promoted. Oh, that's great. Okay, yeah, one more step forward, another life kind of. All of that is I think essential. It's the small stuff. It always gets back to that. We wanted splashy and big miraculous cures, and we got it with pain pills, and look where it led us. It's the small daily work, the incremental improvements that make life, that get us to a positive result. Does not happen overnight by any means. It's messy, it's stumbling, but that is where I believe human beings have always been headed. That's how we make innovation. That's how we make improvement and progress.
And I think part of it too is coming from a place of humility and knowing as one woman who told me who worked with addicts and homeless people, she said, really, there but for the grace of God go I. Because I think when you drill down into the stories of many of these people, they can tell you the moment when things went off the rails, and if it can happen, and it's just unfortunate that the way back from that moment is complicated.
That's why I studied neuroscience, because that shows us that all of us have the capacity to be addicts.
I can't wait to read those sections of your new book on neuroscience, because
Thank you. I think
we have really underestimated the power of kindness, the power of prayer, the power of being in a forest and really looking at the tree. All of those things that are free. They are free, and they are
free.
And I don't mean to simplify the complexity of this tangled web that we've woven for ourselves at all, but there are things available.
You're right. It's very much like what brains were like at Dreamland Pool. Think about all these people coming together, kind of like this mixing, this understanding. It wasn't perfect, it was messy, but it was like we are part together, and that's what people felt when they lost it too.
Right. Bev, you were trying to break in. You see, you can't, because we're just gabbing.
I'm loving the conversation, but Teresa has raised an interesting issue that is unfortunately probably part of our country, Liz, and not in Canada. But and Sam, we talked about this earlier in one of our conversations, insurance companies dictating these are the number of weeks you will have for therapy. And that really rethinking that. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I mean, insurance companies are part of the mix of this whole story in a way that we really haven't talked about. There's so many other things we haven't talked about, but one way, for example, is they were early on the ones who said, we're not, and pain therapy used to be, many years ago, used to be that they would treat a single individual with a whole, again, mosaic, a community of treatments, and they would adjust them kind of like knobs on a dial, like, okay, acupuncture, okay, nutrition, exercise, job therapy, marital counseling, all these different things. And then the insurance companies began to say, why do we want to pay for all this? We got pills, everyone wants them, they're cheap. And so doctors were left with fewer and fewer and fewer tools to deal with someone's very, very complicated story of pain. And that's what got into it. Yes, and so now I still think that there are many, many ways in which the insurance companies need to be brought in, forced in, talked in, whatever, to this table, because they are essential in all this. And one of the ways is one of the things that you mentioned, that too often they have unrealistic ideas of how long some treatment might take, and to remove people from treatment or to remove them from MAT gets them back to the street where the drugs are very, very potent. All of that is very scary to watch and so on. How that happens, I mean, I believe that happens through legislation. I believe that happens through lobbying and through people being aware of the necessity of insurance. But I will say this, I would say that a lot of HMOs, certainly, to the extent that they are your health insurance, are coming around to this idea. I've seen this too, and they're coming around to the idea that we don't just give pills for pain. There's been certain amounts of change with this awakening over the last few years in this country, a certain amount of awakening towards what else needs to happen. And one thing is, I found you think you're doing one thing, and that leads to something else you got to do. It's like a thread you follow through, and I think it's one of the. That's why I say the opioid epidemic is actually one of the most powerful forces for change in this country, because it's forcing us to rethink customs, policies, habits, budget priorities, ways of living, how important it is to actually eat good food. Your consumer choices matter enormously, these kinds of things. It's forcing us to get back to, I believe, a simpler way of life. I began when I was writing the book, I stopped eating sugar. I stopped drinking sodas and that kind of thing. Again, get a lot more exercise, all that kind of stuff, I think is part of what we need to take away, all of us, from from this very, very catastrophic problem we've faced over the last 20, 25 years.
And I would just add, somebody once said that if you're suffering, one of the best things to do is to help somebody else. And
Yep.
so in the life repair, I think that is possible. And certainly in Canada, I wouldn't suggest that we've got a knock on rehabilitation and recovery. It's because it is complex, and I think too often our political leaders have not been willing to honor that degree of complexity and to bring people to the table who can participate, who are not just government bureaucrats. It has to go back down, as Sam was saying, to the community and percolate from the ground up. And yeah, so, you know, it's it ain't simple, but this conversation's been delicious, and I bet Bev's going to cut us off any moment.
Well,
So I want to say before you and I go, Sam, I see you, and I'm so delighted.
Oh, thank you very much, Liz. It's great talking with you. It's really fantastic. Had a good time.
well, thank you both for really a very thoughtful discussion of such issues that are important. Let's move on to the next slide. And what I hope we do continue this conversation. And I think you've pointed out so many ways that we have almost a unique opportunity to address these issues, both in the context of the opioid epidemic, but now within COVID. So many of your thoughts I will take away to help shape our work in the future. I wanted to let everybody know on the call that we promised that we would be giving away, Sam was very nice and has signed 2 copies, and we're going to be having a drawing, and we'll be announcing the winners for who participated in this webinar and who registered for the conference. And that will be on September 10th at the celebratory closing session for the international conference. So we will continue talking about these issues and remembering this extraordinary conversation. Thank you, Liz and Sam. I'm hoping, next slide, please. I'm hoping that many of you will join us next week. We have another exciting pre-conference webinar, again, on a very timely topic about expanding telehealth, but doing it in partnership with patients and families from diverse communities where using this technology may be new and uncomfortable, and they may have challenges in terms of access. And we'll be bringing a little bit of Nashville to you with Kix Brooks' album on New to Town. And so be sure to register for that webinar, which is free. And we'll see you on July 30th. And next slide. We would love for you to participate in this quick survey about the conversation today. Again, thank you all so much for being with us. See you soon. Bye-bye.